Thrilled to have Dave West here. Dave is the CEO and product owner of Scrum.org. And I'd be curious which title he thinks is more important. But I've known Dave for a couple of years now, maybe 3 or 4. Gotten to know him a lot better in the last couple of weeks. I think this is going to be a real treat for everybody. So with that, Dave, I think you're the man of the hour here.
Great. Well, thank you, Reggie, and thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here. It's great to talk about something that I actually care about quite a lot. In fact, this week on talking of social media on Facebook, I got into an interesting debate with Larry Matriani, I don't know if you know him, and some other people about product ownership, product management, agile product management. And it's definitely a thorny topic for sure. So hopefully I'm about to at least address some of the issues as we talk about this, and certainly talk about the context of agile product management, agile product ownership, whatever you want to call it, as we progress through this, and maybe provide you with a few little anecdotes or a few little ideas that you can take back to your teams and apply. I won't necessarily solve all your problems. I wish I could, but it's always a lot harder, isn't it, in reality? Luckily, I get to sit in an ivory tower just looking across the agile landscape now. Though I do some product ownership, and I am reminded how hard it is every time. You can only imagine what it's like to be the product owner when one of your principal stakeholders is Ken Schwaber, the creator of Scrum, and your products are all about Scrum. You can imagine what that's like. Anyway, yeah, that's me, Dave West. You can tweet to me, email me, and the like there. There's my boss, Ken Schwaber. As you can see, there's a bit of a hair thing going on here at Scrum.org. Hopefully my replacement one day will not look like both of us, and will be very different. You know who Scrum.org is. Reggie obviously is a professional Scrum trainer, one of our 350 trainers around the world. Thought leadership, yeah, assessments, training, etc. I'm not going to bore you with that. You know who we are, I think. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the context for product leadership and product management in this modern age. You know, ultimately, I follow, some people follow BTS, you know, the band, or maybe they're very into American football and love Green Bay or whatever, or the Patriots or whatever. I follow economists. And the economist I particularly like is a lady called Khalida Perez. I don't follow many economists. She's actually the only one. And she talks about technology and technology ages, and talks about the economics of ages. And as you can see, she's described these 5 ages that we're supposedly gone through. It's a model. It's worth what it's worth. It just provides a mechanism for looking at the world and trying to make some sense of it, even though the world often is very unsensical and doesn't seem to make any sense at all. But in 1771, the Industrial Revolution began in a little place just in the north of England, the first mill, etc. And since those times, we're in this 5 waves of technology. You know, the age of steam, the age of steel, the age of oil and mass production. In fact, some would argue that we're still navigating out of the age of oil and mass production, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But the current age really is this idea of the digital age, or the software computer age, as it were. The reason why I bring this up is because there's some interesting characteristics. This is the Khalida's work that I believe, and my assertion to the reason why product management is so important today, and the reason why we need to think of it in a little bit of a different way than we have historically, is because I believe, my assertion, my hypothesis, as it were, is that we're entering the deployment phase of the digital age, which is very hard to say. Actually, you say it quickly 3 times. The deployment age of the digital age. No, the deployment phase of the digital age. There you see, it's not even, doesn't even rhyme, so it's really, really hard. So the reason why I say that's so important is it has huge implications. The previous 2 phases are really about early adoption, really. Now, I would argue that COVID and the pandemic has tipped us to really work in a very different way, to approach this world in a different way, that the deployment age ultimately means that everybody is going to be a digital native organization, that even if you're producing interesting actually. I was talking to an organization that makes drywall. Who knew? Apparently, the use of technology in drywall is increasingly becoming a massive thing. Not the actual drywall. You don't, Bill Gates hasn't put chips in it, so it is monitoring you as you speak. But the ability to make it, the managing demand, looking at production, the supply chain, the amount of information that this drywall company is collecting, and the amount of decisions that it's making in real time has changed massively because of the pandemic, predominantly because because of supply chain has changed massively, but also so has consumption and how building has worked throughout. That they provide drywall across the United States and Canada and have a lot of plants in Mexico, and it's sort of interesting what's happening. So even they are ultimately changing the way that they work, the way that they do planning, the way that they think about capital. The way in which they basically manage risk, the way in which they empower teams to make decisions, the way in which they govern those decisions. I believe ultimately that every organization is going down this journey. And I think the pandemic ultimately has created the momentum to do this. And if you're interested or you have trouble sleeping, because it's an economist book, so I'd recommend that looking at the work of Khalida. So really what this means as we navigate to this different way of thinking is the planning horizons are changing. So I am the CEO of Scrum.org. And at the start of the pandemic, we had this very, very nice roadmap for 2020. It was on my wall, actually, in an office that I rarely go to now. And we were starting work down this. And then March the 13th came. And pretty much I crossed it out and put up, we're going to go to digital online classes. And everything was all about that. And then the impact of that, the impact on licensing, the impact on competition, the pricing model, all of this came out of that one decision. And fundamentally, all the things that I thought we're going to do in 2020 were thrown out the window. Since that time, I've very much changed how I think about planning. You'd have thought I'd have always thought about planning in this way. I'm an agile guy, right? But I used to have an annual sort of vision, and not an annual vision, but an annual plan that really drove our investment decisions at Scrum.org. And I'd talk to Ken about it, and we'd work out this thing, and then we start executing it. We'd inspect and adapt to move as we delivered or didn't deliver on that plan. But ultimately, that has changed significantly, and I tend to now work in 3 months increments of value with a very broad, high-level idea of what's longer. The other thing that's really, really apparent and has changed was certainly in a lot of large organizations, and perhaps because of Amazon, perhaps because of other organizations that have become very successful over the last few years, is this alignment to customers. And the most agile organizations that I see are ones where there's a clear line of sight. They're empowered teams, small groups, small teams, empowered to make decisions around the business, around the technology, around the solutions they're creating, and that have a clear line of sight to customer. Customer has become a lot more important. Now, you wonder why, and I think there's a lot of reasons. I think one, that you have to have a stronger relationship with the customer because the customer keeps changing their mind, their opinions, their ideas, and having an understanding of their needs allows us to build better solutions because their needs are changing and evolving, and our potential opportunity to deliver on those needs is very varied, and we can do many different things to do that. I also think to some extent our customers are becoming more empowered themselves in their ability to make choices. The amount of information that they have at their fingertips is vastly superior to the days when I was a child back in England, in Leicester, just out about 100 miles north of London. And I used to, information was in this place called a library. I mean, and we'd go, me and my gran once a week to the library, and I'd spend the entire time looking at, these big books, and I'd only allowed to take 3, and there'd always be a decision about which ones I would take and the like. Now, obviously, children can just type on the internet and instantly get access to the body of all human knowledge. It's amazing what that provides in terms of empowerment and in terms of knowledge, and how fickle customers can suddenly become. So I think that ultimately customers have become more important. We live in a world of abundance. It might not feel that today, I don't know about you. I feel that I feel maybe a level of scarcity, maybe because I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old boy, and I'm always tired or always dealing with fights or wrestling or broken sofas. But that feeling of scarcity, I don't think is true. That we have a website that gets about 1.3 million people every month. It's running on AWS. It costs about $1,200. I think it's actually now about $1,600 a month. The fact that we have the ability at scrum.org to release a product and instantly, thousands of people are potentially taking advantage of it and using it. The fact that we live in a world where technology is just amazing and we can do anything. Ignoring your political bent about viruses and immunization, the fact that we could build a vaccine so quickly is just a testament to the amazing ingenuity that human race can provide today, and humans, etc. So we live in this opportunity-rich world, which is actually challenging because choice isn't necessarily always good, right? Cross-functional teams, we all know about that. What the pandemic was really interesting. I've been doing some work with McKinsey, and what they noticed was that teams took center stage in the pandemic. If you could go to American Airlines and you saw that the C-level executives or the very senior executives were actually in the call centers the first few weeks of the pandemic, making decisions on policy. Legal was sitting in a desk at the back. You always put them at the back, right? And making, like saying, can we do this? Is it legal? Finance was sitting over there. You'd say, hey, is this going to destroy our, can we give, etc. These flights to people? Can we postpone this travel? What can we do? They were making decisions, and it was very much a team-based model, and that model continued throughout the pandemic. Cross-functional teams, many different skills, delivering value to the customer and allowing them to organize how they want. Now, the rise of the creator, when I say creator, I mean content, value, innovation. Ultimately, the previous age was all about management. It was about building systems. It was about building processes around those systems and creating an environment where managers could manage effectively, a bit like an American football coach, right? Delivering that. Now, ultimately, that has changed, where you just look at the big resignations that we're having today, and the challenge it is to find talent. It isn't managers really we're looking for as a role. It tends to be the creators. Maybe it's a software engineer, maybe it's a marketing professional, a social media analyst, maybe it's a whatever. And it's the rise of that creator, as it were. So we're living in very different times with a very different change cycle. We're living in an environment where change is inevitable, and we need to build our organizations, our systems, our, dare I say, how we even approach the world with change in mind. And change is really hard. I don't know about you, but for the first 6-9 months of the pandemic, as I was navigating my kids going to school or not going to school, remote learning, getting groceries, not getting groceries, running out of toilet paper. Actually, Boston didn't run out of toilet paper. I was continuously in this moment of, looking at number of people that had died in America, looking at number of people, but my mum works in a supermarket in the UK, worrying about my mother, seeing what was happening with them. Change was this background noise that was incredibly hard to manage. And I had to put in some routines, some processes around my life so that I actually survived it in a consistent way. And I think organizations have to do something very similar to that. So because of all of this, I think that product thinking is taking more of a center stage. Organizations are trying to grapple with the capabilities that they're delivering, and in the Scrum Guide, product is actually used to describe anything that has a clear boundary, that has a clear customer, that has a defined value, as it were. But they're trying to define these chunks of value with clear boundaries and understand whether it might be a part of a much broader value stream, or it might be a part of a much broader business process, but trying to define these capabilities and trying to manage the dependencies between these things to keep them as really self-reliant as possible and deliver the value to customers. They're looking at small empowered teams, collections of teams, hopefully, but or maybe just one or two, focused on that in some manner. And they're looking at how to push down decision making to be as close as possible to the value that they're delivering and to the customer that they're serving. So ultimately, we call it product thinking, and product thinking is taking center stage in this new normal, as it were. Now, there's a lot of questions about who, what, who's in charge of it, what have they called, what's their, what are their responsibilities, where does the product manager, is it the product analyst, is it the product owner, is it the chief product officer, how does it all work? And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through these slides. But ultimately, because of this age that we've moved into, this digital age where change is inevitable, and where we've moved into this digital world, and moving out of the age of mass production and oil into something different, I believe ultimately that productization and this idea of products is taking center stage. And it wouldn't be a talk without a Dilbert. This is just and it's hard. It's incredibly difficult to be this product person, to act as this conduit of trying to help a team shape its solution, to manage all of the stakeholders with their increasingly different perspectives on it, to drive a vision that delivers value to customers in a constrained way, maybe doing it in a way that's socially responsible and that is morally correct, as it were. And it's hard. It's not easy at all. So Scrum has this idea of the product owner, and when I talk to Ken and Jeff to some extent, though this really came from Ken's work, the idea of the product owner was really interesting. So he was working at the FBI Sentinel program, that very well-known, famous case study where the US, well, the FBI, as therefore US government, I guess, had spent an awful lot of money trying to centralize the information systems that supported the Federal Bureau of Investigations. Prior to that, each of these different offices had their own information systems, and the exchange of information was incredibly poorly done. The FBI Sentinel project basically was trying to bring it all together to allow us to make better decisions to catch gangsters and gun runners and I don't know what else the FBI catches, but those sort of naughty people, right? And the program had been a disaster from the moment it began, for all the classic reasons. Not a well-intentioned disaster, as all disasters usually are, but it had done that classic thing. They'd scaled very quickly. They'd built an incredibly elaborate architecture. The technology had changed because there was so many blooming requirements. They were conflicting. Every single person had a say, and they designed by committee, and ultimately it didn't work. So Ken came in bringing object technology and Scrum. That was kind of his thing back in the day. And he said, well, hang on a minute. Okay, let's reduce the number of teams. Well, luckily they had to do that because they'd run out of money, which is always a great way of focusing. Some would argue that lean, the word, is not a mistake because you reduce everything around you and then you can be incredibly successful. But so let's reduce the number of teams. Let's keep very much focused and let's start work. And they did. They used an empirical process. It was a bit like Scrum. It wasn't quite Scrum at that point, but it became Scrum later on and defined as Scrum. And they started working on delivering increments and delivering stuff and delivering value. And then they realized, that some of the sprint reviews weren't going particularly well. Some of the reviews, some of these iterative reviews, as they may have been called at the time, weren't going particularly well. And they asked, why was that? And the reason why is because they started with something in mind, and then people came in and said, oh, no, we think we need to do that. They did talk to users. That was very important. And each of those users gave a different opinion, and the team went from left to right, to right to left, to right to left. And the project manager was really spending their entire time trying to navigate that complexity, and it wasn't really going very well. So Ken made an edict. He said, hey, only one person can tell the team what to do, and that's me. And he said, I am the product owner. Actually, initially he said, I am the agile product manager. I'm in charge of this product. Every decision needs to come through me. It is, I know we're empowering teams and none of that, but when it comes to deciding what we're going to build, and ultimately what he did was he focused the team so they actually could deliver something. Now, was it right? Was it wrong? I don't know. But some of the best sprint reviews are when you deliver the wrong thing, much to the annoyance of most project managers in the room. And I apologize if I called you out. But delivering the wrong thing is great because it means all your assumptions have been clearly shown to be awfully wrong, perhaps. And it gives us an opportunity to say, okay, we learned something, and then we can move on. So ultimately, this idea, oh, hang on, sorry, don't know what happened there. You see, this is it. I thought I'd get good at this. Oh, hang on. So this idea was that there was the product owner. Now, what's interesting is the new Scrum Guide really did double down on this. It really has, the Scrum Guide that came out in November, not last year, the year before, you know, created this idea of one team focused on one product, introduction of the product goal, removable shippable focus to be all about value, and definition of what a product really is. So a product is a vehicle to deliver value, has a clear boundary, known stakeholders, defined users or customers. A product can be a service, physical product, or something more abstract. So ultimately, that day when Ken created the product owner back on the FBI Sentinel project, and the idea of those accountabilities, and now in the Scrum Guide have really sort of like become a pivotal part of what Scrum is. Now, they're accountabilities, not a job title. It is the accountabilities necessary in Ken and Jeff's perspective, the minimum set of accountabilities necessary to deliver the value and to get Scrum working. It isn't all the things that you need to do. Oh, sorry. It isn't all the things that you need to do. And that's a very important point. Accountability is a key word here. It isn't a job description. It's saying, look, there needs to be somebody, one human being, accountable for maximizing the value of the work that the Scrum team's doing. You know, and how it's done is very varied in every organization. But you will start finding problems when those accountabilities are not being effectively done. So it isn't a job title. It's really gratifying when we see product owner as a job title, you know, and it's like when you say to Ken and Jeff, did you think this would ever happen? And Ken's like, no, and Jeff's like, yes. And anyway, that's another story. What's interesting though is that when it has been defined as a job title, there's a lot of other things that they must do. There's a lot of other descriptions and responsibilities that come from that. And the Scrum Guide does not provide those, unfortunately. It is the minimum definition of what you need to do to get Scrum to work, to deliver an increment of value every sprint. And that I think that's a really important point. And some of those accountabilities are things around the product goal. So understanding why the team is moving in that direction and being responsible for that commitment to the product backlog. Other things are around communicating those backlog items, so acting as that facilitator, as it were, to describe why we're doing stuff, ordering it to decide what priority we're delivering and stuff like that, making sure that it's transparent to all the stakeholders that care about it. Now, not doing necessarily all of the solutioning, not doing all of the requirements work, not doing all of the testing, not doing, you know, the point is those things need to be done to deliver value, but they're not defined as the accountabilities of the product owner in the Scrum Guide. So in a nutshell, maximizing the value that the team delivers is what the product owner definition is in the Scrum Guide. For the development team. Now, interestingly, I should say Scrum team. This slide was before yes, anyway. So Scrum team, it should say. We changed the Scrum Guide and I forgot to update this. Sole person for managing the product backlog, must be empowered to make decisions, and no one else can tell you what to do. The situation in your organization will obviously be different for you. What the job title is, who's actually doing it, all of those things will vary over and over again, depending on the situation. So before we move on to talking a little bit about the current state and then looking at what some of the ideas for doing this well and how to mix this with agile product management and some of the most important things you need to focus on, I want to give an opportunity for some questions or comments hopefully that hasn't surprised anybody, but I'd love to hear from you just for a minute or two, just so we can set the scene for the second half of this presentation. I don't know, Reggie, has there been any questions posted, or is there anything? I mean, anybody can feel free to speak now. Obviously, Reggie, is anything happening?
Yeah, so we haven't had any questions posted, but we didn't ask either. So,
oh, that was damn those protocols when you forget to actually execute them. By the way, if we had a time machine, I'd go back and say, at the start of this presentation, if you've got any questions that have sort of come to mind, please feel to enter them in the chat, and Reggie and others will hopefully manage them and maybe do some product ownership of that backlog of questions. However, obviously that doesn't mean you can't bring up questions now. Has anybody got any questions or comments?
Looks like Rachel has her hand up, so Rachel, go ahead.
Hello,
Sure.
Rachel.
Hello, David. So my question is going to show my my greenness, my newness, and I'm okay with that. But when we okay, great. So I already see, if we go back to sort of your industrial age shift over to, you know, fast forward to the digital age, I palpably see, hear that our engineering department is in one of those columns, and I will call them managers or dev director. I'll just call them the folks who oversee stuff. They may still be sort of straddling the columns.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about C-suite level, but it is a Scrum and thinking about, you know, the what's required in the digital age is healthy and fun, and like it's just awesome. And then there's this, I'm not going to call it a lag. I'm going to call it I'm going to call it something. But how does a Scrum team, those who are Scrum masters, those who are a part of the Agile movement in a company, has anyone done this? How do we prove the case for and enlighten those who are in fact making decisions? I mean, regardless of whether, you know what I'm saying? So it's a it's a self-organized team. It's this, that, and the other thing, and we're there's a lot of bounce back because there's just anyway.
Yeah, I get it.
What's happening?
I mean, so what's happening? So what you're seeing, I believe, and obviously I don't know the details, I don't know your organization, but what we tend to see, and I've seen it like a million times, and I can tell you, I was at an executive leadership retreat, which is fabulous. First one since the pandemic. I was invited to speak at this retreat, and you know, they always have good food and booze and stuff, so I'm like there. So I'm, you know, there. It's in upstate, up in New Hampshire, so it was in the mountains. It was all very pretty and all fabulous. And as I was there, I'm like, this is a technology leadership retreat for a large financial institution. There was no business people there. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute. You're not an outsourced technology vendor. Why is the business? Why are they not here? Oh, they didn't want to come. They don't like technology. I'm like, really? This is the CIO and all of the CIO's direct reports. I'm like, what the heck? And I'm like, well, but don't they realize you're a technology firm that does financial services? And they're like, no, they don't think in that way. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So what we're seeing over and over again, Rachel, is this friction between the industrial mindset and paradigm and the something else, the post-industrial, or I'm calling it digital for the want of a better title. And what we see is the real friction point is the management, middle management, that sort of area is finding it incredibly hard. I don't know how to fix that. Because what we're also seeing is we're seeing a lot of C-level executives say, we need to be digital, but they're not willing to change, or it's an and, not a we're going to change kind of thing. It's like digital on top of all of the annual budgeting cycles, the fact that we we, instead of taking the way that we organize work, we do this bottom-up planning exercise once a year, how the PMO operates, how management and risk operates, all of that stuff. We've got this incredibly complex hierarchy about decision making. We don't like anybody dealing with a customer. We've got these legacy systems that are disconnected totally from the business processes and no desire to change how we approach them. We believe in serious code ownership and all this stuff. And we're not willing to try different things. However, so I see that all in all over and over again. And then they're wondering why ultimately that their release frequency is like every 3 months, because the customer only wants that, of course. Really? You know, and then you see organizations like the Teslas of the world, the SpaceXs of the world. You see those organizations that literally every single Tesla is unique that comes off the production line. So they do a complete a certification process on every single Tesla, and you see the difference in strategy compared to BMW that does the entire range of products once a year. You know, you've got these sort of very different mentalities. What I'm starting to see though is on certain product lines, on certain parts of the business, we're starting to see a fundamental shift. Maybe it's certain parts of the portfolio that, you know, you've got more creative leadership. Or maybe it's actually certain customers that are dragging people into that 21st century. I don't know if we're going to actually facilitate this change without mass groups of people retiring. You know, there's that saying about science progresses one funeral at a time. And I don't want to be as negative as that, but it certainly does require some quite fundamental changes to how we think about business. I do see a lot of enlightened organizations though. I see, you know, whether they're building robots like just our Boston Dynamics. I dropped my son off at school. His school is next to the offices of Boston Dynamics, and they have these little robots that look like dogs running around the car park, which is super cool. And my son talks about Transformers every time we go past it. But we're seeing organizations change. We're seeing some, financial services are changing. So we're starting to see some of that. I think ultimately what I would tell Scrum teams is I would say, find your customer. If it's an internal customer, serve them to the best of your ability. Basically cut the suit to suit your cloth. Provide the evidence that shows that this way is better. Build that capability, build that muscle memory to frequently release, to be maniacally focused on continuous integration if you're in the technology space, to be willing to provide long-term forecasts with that caveat of predictability and how reliable they are, and then provide a nice product vision that takes you to that point, but incrementally deliver the value. Do all of the things that you know, Rachel, are the best things to do, and cut your suit to suit your craft. Do it, deliver it, demonstrate it, and then over time, as you get better leadership, I hate to say that, but leadership that's more in tune with this new way of thinking, that's more willing to think about risk and governance and funding in different ways, you'll see a movement. And I honestly believe that. At the moment you're seeing that friction point, we're in that sort of in-between stage. I think over the next 2 to 5 years, there'll be radical changes, or there'll be 6 or 7 companies that rule the world and everybody will work for them. It's one of those two things.
I do see opportunity, even though it's sort of a bleak, it doesn't feel good, but I do see opportunity in it. And I just want to put it out there in the ether that I'd be very curious if anyone would like to share in the Utah Agile chat or something where they're seeing the bridges being built. They're seeing creative, agile-minded leaderships or whatever. I would just be really curious to see how it's going and what's going on at software companies. Thanks, David, so much.
And obviously keep your eyes on organizations like Tesla, SpaceX. They're doing some radically crazy ass things that are kind of fun and disrupting their industries accordingly. So I'm going to zoom through the next few slides. I think we all know that and I think Rachel described it quite well, that the current world is very different perhaps than we want. We see many organizations where the BA project manager is becoming the product owner. We see many organizations aligned around systems, not outcomes, not customers. You know, products exist on the business, but applications and systems exist in IT. Agile being driven by IT, so there's a huge disconnect, like that financial services company I mentioned. And process is more important than ownership and responsibility. Everybody's responsible, therefore nobody is. That kind of thing. And then the PMO, you know, is well intentioned, but it's trying to act as this sort of glue that brings everything together. So it really isn't easy, you know, this current world. Navigating from this current world is really very different. So I can't solve that, you know, that all these problems, but I can answer a few questions. What does it mean about work? You know, doesn't it mean that if I'm a product owner, as defined in the Scrum Guide, responsible for ensuring my team and the teams that, you know, that are connected to that team are delivering the most value to my organization? You know, what does that mean? Isn't it too much work? What should I focus on? How can I be measured? And what is my title or career path? There's a lot of work. You know, it's funny, Reggie said, which do I prefer, CEO or product owner? I love product ownership. I don't do much of it anymore. So I have empowered a series, you know, my organization, I've got 7 product owners that I've empowered to make the decisions about key parts of our business and key customers that we serve. There's a lot of work doing it, and I don't have time as the CEO. All I do is basically create an environment. I provide money, I provide governance, meaning legal and all that kind of stuff, finance, accounting, making sure we're not breaking the law, making sure that I support my team, and I ask questions. And the product owners get on it, because there's stakeholder management, hugely complicated, managing the budget, looking at the customers, looking at the competitors, the vision, the partners, the ROI. There's lots and lots of things. Now, the great thing about Scrum is you have a team, or maybe you've got multiple Scrum teams that are working on this product, and they can do the work. We can partner on doing the work. In fact, that was so important to the recent update to the Scrum Guide that we really changed the idea from a development team, a product owner, and a Scrum Master is the Scrum team, to be one Scrum team that comprises of developers, people that do the work, and a product owner and a Scrum Master, ultimately accountable for delivering valuable increments. So everybody is responsible for doing the work. The product owner, yes, makes certain decisions about value, what's the most valuable work to do, and sets the direction with respect to the product goal and helps the team form a sprint goal. But ultimately, the team does the work. That means anybody and everybody can be doing, you know, requirements work, can be talking to stakeholders, maybe doing some building some personas. And every sprint, everybody gets the opportunity to understand the problem a little bit better. The team works however it works to deliver the value that's necessary. And that means sometimes teammates that normally just write code have to step out of that world and maybe talk to a customer, help write a survey, look at some data and do some data analytics. Obviously, everybody's always going to bring their strengths to anything that they do, but it's a great opportunity to partner together to actually deliver the value. So the requirements, the product backlog, the user stories can be written by anybody. Yes, the product owner is ultimately accountable for ensuring the team is delivering the most valuable stuff, but at the end of the day, it's the team or teams that do the work to provide the details to actually deliver that stuff. You have to do requirements. There's no magic. Requirements need to be written, and depending on your industry, maybe some of them have to be documented in a very defined fashion. If you're building planes or medical devices, etc., we've been doing financial services systems. But ultimately, the product owner isn't responsible for creating all of those requirements. The product owner is responsible for ensuring value is delivered. It's complicated. So sometimes the product owner might be the best person to do it. Sometimes they aren't the best person to do it. Sometimes the requirements are very well hidden. Sometimes they're not. So what does this mean for a team in sprint 1? It means the team, notice no sprint 0. Ultimately, the team will sit down, look at that product goal, help the product owner create maybe that first product backlog, as it were, and then pick the first thing that they're going to work on, which ultimately might add stuff to the product backlog, add some details to it. Now, I always encourage every team to deliver something that's observable, that the increment actually is tangible so that stakeholders can provide feedback. I don't really like documents being created, but that might potentially observations and learning can be part of that process, and obviously will be. And who should you please? I mean, customer stakeholders, Scrum teams, all of those people potentially are people that a product owner has to work with. In fact, I would argue that perhaps the most important thing to do as a product owner is to create that compelling vision. I believe that actually has to happen before the team is formed. You build a definition of true north. What are we going to try to achieve? It's almost that sort of business case that just that provides enough information to decide whether the team really wants to work on it. In Tesla, they use an open space technology. I don't know why it's called technology, an open space approach where they communicate very clearly what the opportunities are, and then people form around those opportunities and work on them, the engineering people. And that basically means, now, interestingly at Tesla, the things that they're working on, the AI from all of the analytics and systems is presenting that to the people to work on it. But the first thing that I would try to do is group those things in a way that provides some sort of compelling vision. And then we have some clear guardrails about what this work is, and understand what success means, and make it and describe it in a language that everybody can understand. So as a product owner, I would argue perhaps the most important thing that you can do is create that product vision. The other thing about that product vision is that you have this sort of, it sort of drives this magic product box, where if you have a good, compelling vision, you have an understanding of the goal that you're trying to achieve, the customer that you're trying to serve, the context that customer is working on, then you have the ability to start tweaking things around business model, channel architecture, user experience, customer features, in the context of this desirable, feasible, viable, and is it right for you as an organization to approach it in this way? So you're going to be making choices continuously around this, and then hopefully incrementally delivering those choices so that the stakeholders can observe them, so you can make better informed decisions about that. Customers obviously fit in that. So customers start becoming important. Now, I was almost 3 years ago, I was in Brazil, and I spent a week in Sao Paulo visiting a lot of different customers. It was an awesome, awesome week. I put on about, about 5 or 6 kilos, because a lot of pounds. Don't know how many pounds that is. What's that? 20 pounds or something? I don't know. Because I'd eat so much. Brazil's food is fabulous. I recommend it. But what was interesting is that I visited lots of organizations doing Scrum, and they were doing it well. It was burn down charts and all sorts of things. By the way, that's not in Scrum, but just thought I'd say it just for fun. They were running, I had a translator. A lot of them were talking in Portuguese, but they were doing great dailies. They had fabulous sprints, but I realized something was missing. Every single team that I visited, they weren't talking about the customer. They didn't have personas on the wall. There wasn't necessarily always a clear sprint goal. Value and outcomes were missing. They were talking about work. They were using Scrum to do work. Now, Scrum's great at doing work, but that product owner was really acting like a project manager. They hadn't built that compelling vision other than the project charter that they had. It was really not around the customer. It was about the work that they were doing. They were trying to do it in the most efficient way. So getting the customer, and then using this idea of design thinking and lean startup to actually incrementally deliver value against that customer, and use Scrum as the execution engine, is increasing what I'm seeing these product-centric organizations use. And I think it's really, really exciting. Now, I was disappointed in Brazil, and I started talking to some of them about that, and it was exactly what Rachel really brought up. There was this massive disconnect between the Scrum teams and the business. I think that we have to build those bridges. We have to cement those relationships. And really, probably the best and easiest way to do that is revolved around our mission and the customers that mission serves. I think that actually provides that compelling approach. Another key element to product ownership is around measurement. They're sort of very simple when we look at it at one level. You know, it's very easy to think, when I was working at a startup, it was very easy to measure success. It was about how many bugs how many bugs the customers were finding, the 3 customers that we had when I started, and how regularly we were delivering value to them, and how many new customers and new revenue we were creating. As the organization becomes bigger and more complicated, it becomes harder and harder to see how you fit into this value measure. And without clear measures and without a clear definition of outcome, it's very, very hard to be empirical. It's very hard to be agile without thinking about those outcomes. So I would argue that perhaps some of the most interesting measures are in 4 sort of camps. One is around there's 2 that are very internally centric, about how frequently you're delivering value. The more, and when I say delivering, I mean to real people that are providing feedback. What is the length of that feedback loop and that cycle? And how much of the stuff you're delivering is actually valuable stuff that they're like, that is valuable, that is innovative, that's going to change the needle. And how much of it is just keeping the lights on, managing the system, providing compliance reports, etc. So those 2 are very inside looking. Outward looking are unrealized value and current value. What is the value that we're delivering, and how much value are we not delivering? What is the opportunity here? Now, sometimes this requires very creative thinking. If you're delivering a commercial product, it's pretty easy. You've got some sort of measurable value of your market. You've got some sort of revenue number that you're doing. But when you actually look at a system in a bigger organization, it's much harder to do that. What is the opportunity? If you improve that claims process, that screen, those sets of screens, that particular business process, what value can we do? Is it about efficiency? Can we, reduce the amount of time the claims handler is having to search for information? Is it about compliance, the likelihood of being sued? Can we reduce that? Sometimes you have to be creative, but these questions are great questions to ask of the value of the thing that you're delivering. The last little piece to this jigsaw puzzle is job title. I don't know what you should be called. I really don't. Every situation that I've encountered, it's slightly different. Yes, they have product managers and at Tesla and SpaceX, and and maybe the title, the person that's making the decisions about what goes into the systems, that it should be called a product manager. That's okay. I don't really care, but what I do care about is if you are starting to build out this capability organization, think about 4 things. Think about the discipline. Product management is a great discipline. Think about learning about the customers. Design thinking, lean UX are really good ways of thinking about that. Think about the business models. So lean startup, some really interesting stuff there. And then thinking about things like Scrum and product ownership as the mechanism to deliver on that. If you can combine these 4 things, then I think you will be a fabulous product leader. And I don't know what your title is. So I know I've sort of whizzed through a few things from this idea that we've entered this digital age, the importance of product management and product thinking in this digital age, the challenges of doing that in the reality in most organizations, and then the stuff around what should we be doing if we are a product leader in our organization, and what about the amount of work? What about managing stakeholders? What about the most important thing, which I believe is vision and having a clear and compelling definition of the why that you're doing it. You're not an agile requirements manager if you're a product leader in this modern age. Requirements still need to be done, but they're done by the teams. You might be the best place to help them do that. That's okay. Partner with your teams to make it happen. It's a hard, difficult role. It's as much managing stakeholders as it is doing anything else. I think it will get easier. I see us learning as we go and adding more and more sort of insights. recently you saw that there's a lot more stuff coming out of Mind the Product. You may have seen that. I think it's been bought by Pendo. There's lots of really interesting stuff coming out to help us, stuff around analytics, stuff around design thinking, the work of D-School, etc. Lean UX, the work of Jeff and Josh is helping us. So it's going to get easier. And also, I think organizations are now starting to understand the pivotal role of having this leadership of the things that we're delivering to customers is really, really important. The other thing that's important in your own organization, if you're doing this and you're driving this, and Rachel sort of had a call out to the community here in Utah, is to build that community, to get the product leadership, product managers, agile product managers, product owners together and start supporting each other. And vision is super important, but also measures. If you can put in place some good measures, they'll at least get you asking the right questions. So that's what I wanted to talk about. I know we've sort of spent maybe I'm a bit rusty. It took a bit longer than I thought. I was hoping to have a little bit more time for questions. We've got some time for questions now. I'm not disappearing, so I'm more than willing to stay around a little bit at 3 o'clock my time and carry on answering questions or having a conversation about some of these things. If you don't have time today, because you've got, I know it's a holiday weekend, so you're probably zooming off to go do fabulous skiing in the mountains, you lucky devils, you. Then fair enough, totally get that. I wouldn't want to stand in your way. If, however, you want to ping me later, feel free to reach out. Obviously, dave.west@scrum.org is my email, or if you're very modern, you can tweet me on it, as it were. And of course, LinkedIn is always a fabulous way of getting in touch now. And for more details on product ownership, there's a really good digital path on the scrum.org website. We've got 5 minutes. Reggie, is there any questions, any comments? Anybody want to say anything?
Yeah, there are some good questions in here. And I wanted to point out that pathway that's free, right? All of the pathways.
Oh, yes. Oh, gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Wouldn't want to dirty my hands with money. That would be awful. But yes, it is free. Go and have a look at it. Make comments. It's not perfect, but it's the best we could create at that moment.
Very helpful. So one of the maybe simpler questions was, you mentioned the PO is not a job description, not a job title. Does that apply to the Scrum Master and developers as well?
Oh, gosh, that's a bit political. Honestly, yes. Now, it's very gratifying that PO and Scrum Master are job titles. However, that means that there's no standard template of exactly what that means. In fact, we are still hiring a Scrum Master. So if you're interested in being a Scrum Master for scrum.org, I mean, talk about in the den of lions, as it were. You go to our website. There's an application there. Please or just hit me up and send in your interest. And so when we were writing the job posting, it was really interesting because obviously the Scrum Guide accountabilities are the foundation. But there's lots of other things that you're going to be doing. For instance, you're going to be mentoring. We have a program called Year Up. We want to bring in some Year Up students and have an internship around the Scrum Master role. You're going to be doing some content development probably. So there's a lot of additional things that's unique to our instance of the Scrum Master role here at scrum.org. We've called it a Scrum Master because ultimately we believe that a Scrum Master and Agile coach are synonyms. We don't think of them any different. So I believe that it's a great foundation. Product owner accountabilities in the Scrum Guide, Scrum Master accountabilities, developer accountabilities. Those are a great foundation, but you're going to have to add things because they're incomplete in the same way as Scrum is, right? It's a framework, not a process. And you'll add your unique stuff that will make it special. You'll inspect and adapt those things and hopefully improve them continuously. So, gosh. Did that answer? Was I right, Reggie? Did I do a good job there? It was.
That's pretty close what I would have said. Yeah, I thought it was great.
Gosh, it's always worrying when you got somebody more smarter than you on the line and can say things that are better than I could.
No. I think that's everybody else here. Couple more questions if we can get through them. Stephen had, or Stephen, I'm not sure. Sorry, had a few. I'm gonna maybe pick one here that I
Pick
think
the
is
easiest one. Yeah.
Yeah, the easiest one, of course. How do you mitigate the risk of a product owner who is wrong about what is most valuable or what's best for the market, right?
Well, yes. I mean, to be honest, these product owners are gamblers, right? They've gone into Vegas and they're putting money down on red and black. That is the nature, and they will make mistakes. The great thing about Scrum is those mistakes can never cost us more than 30 days of work. So we have a great opportunity at Sprint Review to actually see the work and observe it. I've had situations, I'm not going to say I've got a situation now because that's a bit too dangerous, but I've had situations where I'm the funder of the work and I've attended sprint reviews and I've been very disappointed by the direction it's going. So that actually allows me to have a very frank conversation with the product owner. And because I'm funding, golden rule is the guy with the gold sets the rules, that ultimately one of two things are going to happen. The product owner is going to understand and appreciate my feedback, and because of the position that I'm in, hopefully make decisions around it accordingly. The customer's always right, right? The person paying is always right. Or the product owner may decide that that is not in keeping with his or her vision and say, I can't be the product owner of this if that is the vision that you're funding. Now, the reality of what happens in those conversations is that the product owner provides me with a very clear reason, and I ask some questions, and we end up probably somewhere slightly in the middle, and both of us have learned something from it. But the great thing about sprint reviews is we get the opportunity to really look at our investments every sprint. And I attend all of the sprint reviews that I'm funding, all of the sprints, all of the Scrum teams that I'm funding. I actually attend those sprint reviews. Now, interestingly, I just wrote about the impact of that, because there's a real tightrope that I walk when I attend, and then you can look at this in a blog I wrote. As a stakeholder, I come in, and it's very easy for me to change the effect, to have a massive Hawthorne effect on the sprint review, because when I say something, the team go, ooh. So I have to be very careful that sometimes when I'm questioning the decisions the product owner's making, that I don't do it in a way that undermines their authority with the Scrum team and create some sort of opportunity for the Scrum team, or well, that's not it, which can create some level of distrust and reduce the trust and the respect that the Scrum team has for the product owner. So I have to be very careful. I recently was on a sprint review where I did that very thing, really torpedoed the product owner in front of everybody. I didn't mean to. It was early. I hadn't drank enough tea. I was a bit grumpy. My kids had been up all night. And I just was like, well, that's just stupid. And I said it, and I was like, shh. And I was really, see, I have some responsibility for the information, for the way I turn up at these sprint reviews, but I certainly turn up and help the product owner make those decisions. So the best answer to you, Stephen, is to make sure that the right stakeholders arrive at the sprint reviews, because then it's going to be obvious if they're making the wrong decisions.
David, that sounds like hopefully a chapter in future versions of the Scrum Guide.
I'm not sure we do chapters, but maybe it might be a supporting. Maybe it'll be part of my book when I write my next book. I'm sort of due to write one again, I guess. But it's really interesting the effect the funder has when they go into a sprint review, and how it can end up torpedoing the respect and an authority the product owner has.
Great, thank you. I think this is a follow-up to that. What about the architecture decisions? You know, how do we, I think they're asking.
I think I can. So the reality is that depending on who your product owner is, they may not have a really good understanding of the architecture and the trade-offs that you're making around the investment decisions that ultimately they're just making, right? So can the product owner, is there a chief technical officer as well that balances that? No. I believe at the end of the day that the product owner needs to understand the business and the value, the business and the value that they're trying to create through that product. Now, there's going to be some decisions that the product owner has to make. They're well outside their skill, as it were. And a good product owner will draw on the information and ask the right questions of authorities, whether it's security, whether it's, architecture, performance, all sorts of things, right? Now, it is the responsibility of that architect to be able to communicate the trade-offs and the decision and the value of the things that they're doing in terms that the product owner can clearly understand. And the Scrum Master has a role here as well to provide that environment and to encourage and facilitate, dare I say, coach and mentor both parties so that they can get that transparency. Now, if the product owner makes a decision that the architect doesn't agree with, that's okay. That's a choice. Sometimes you do make decisions that are not necessarily what I would have done in that situation. But what's most important isn't that they make the decision that the architect completely agrees with. It is that they have at least listened to that architect and the architect feels that they have been heard and that they've made that decision in spite. Now, the responsibility of the teammates, the architects as part of this, is to actually articulate those problems and those issues in a way that allows the product owner to really make those decisions. I don't believe there's two backlogs. I believe that ultimately everything lives on one backlog, one product backlog. Then you have a sprint backlog for the actual sprint, and everything is transparent in that. And it's important that that you describe those things in that way. It's not easy. Sometimes you just like banging your head against a brick wall. But if you build a relationship, a trusted relationship with your product leader, then I believe that you can help them understand the decisions that they're really making and make the correct ones.
Yeah, no, I love that. Trusted relationship. That's so critical. We talk a lot about emergent architecture and agile as well, right? Trying to discover, because we don't know ahead of time either, right? This one has to know that one does. Thanks, Dave. Another question from Jerry. You mentioned requirements a few times. Could you briefly describe when requirements are written and by whom?
So requirements happen when they need to happen. So sometimes it might mean, depending on the problem that you're trying to solve, sometimes you may have to describe the thing, maybe the most economic way of understanding the problem to build the right solution is a very detailed requirements process, work, building a spreadsheet, creating CAD CAM models, blah, blah, doing whatever. Doing some MATLAB, which I barely understand, and I'm sure some on the call know much more about it than I. But sometimes it's necessary to do that, right? Because the most economic way of understanding or proving that assumption or understanding that boundary is to do that. So requirements happen just in time. We don't write all the requirements up front. We pick we do enough so that we can make the decisions to decide what to start with. We then work on those things. We document if we decide that we need a little bit better understanding before we build code or build a marketing campaign or build a jet fighter or whatever, or wing of a jet fighter, then we obviously do some work around this. I leave it to the teams to make decisions about when and when not to do requirements. And that's an interesting question because I think that they'll make the right decisions if they understand, if it's a regulated industry, there's some necessity around that, right? And if they understand what they need to do, and if they are empowered to make the right decisions around process and understand the constraints of the organization, maybe there's some standards, maybe that's in the definition, hopefully that's in the definition of done, then they will make the right choices about what requirements need to be written. Some organizations I've seen that do very, do medical stuff, medical devices, their requirements are really almost like tests. And that's how they describe their requirements. And they have FDA approval, which is crazy. I never thought that was possible. Other organizations, there's one particular that I've been involved with recently, have very detailed requirements documents. I think because culturally, their leadership needs that, even though I think they could get a compliance with a very different approach. However, that's just culturally. And it's part of the definition of done in both organizations, and they work, and everybody participates and they don't have a separate requirements team. They're all just embedded, and people are running around a little bit crazy sometimes, but that's okay. So it depends on the situation. Ultimately, I trust teams to make the right decisions about that, as long as they have the right information to make those decisions. So the team does it, helped by the product owner, helped by the constraints or guardrails of the organization. That's what I think good requirements practices are as well.
Well, thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. Thanks all. And yeah, have a great holiday weekend.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.